The Wall Street Journal published an article that the Biden administration rejected the military's proposal to send American civilian specialists to Ukraine to maintain Western military equipment, including F-16 fighter jets. And the article says that the U.S. National Security Council had previously considered sending specialists to Ukraine, but the intelligence community recommended that this idea be abandoned for the time being, given the situation, Mr. Ihor. That the maintenance of combat aircraft may be one of the crucial points for the defense of Ukraine. This is one of the points that is important. Why do you think the United States is against sending specialists to maintain these aircraft? And not only, and can this mission potentially be carried out by our other allies? I mean here, specifically European allies? The question is to lift any prohibitions on Ukraine's ability to search for such specialists on its own, not necessarily in the United States, but in other countries, and to host them and have them perform the relevant task. I.e., we know that there are specialists, land-based, I can't say maritime yet.
Тобто ми знаємо, що фахівців наземних, поки ще не можу сказати морських,
That is, we know that we can recruit ground specialists, I can't say marine specialists, but civilians and others, we have legislation, and those who are willing to do so adapt to it and can perform military tasks. An important question is about weapons, such as airplanes. This is a sophisticated weapon, and the infrastructure must be strong for the aircraft and pilot to perform their tasks. That is why the work is being done, and we can see it today in our representatives working in America. The question is, at the moment, whether they can, and American legislation in this case allows them to do so, or at least at a level that does not prohibit us from looking for specialists around the world, relatively speaking. Since these weapons are still American, the question is kind of complicated, especially if we keep in mind that there's an American strategy from Sullivan, the security specialist, which is to ensure that there is no escalation, that it is controlled, and that everything else fluctuates within these requirements. Denmark was ready to give Ukraine the F-16 fighter jet from the very beginning of the full-scale war. But there was a long discussion about whether it was the right decision, as stated by the head of the Danish government, Mette Frederiksen, according to her. The discussions on the delivery of fighter jets took a lot of time, and she said that I'm sorry that the delivery of F-16s took so long. I was personally ready to give it. Personally, I was ready to give them to Ukraine from the very beginning of the war, but there was a long discussion about whether it was the right decision or not, Frederiksen said at the GlobeCon press conference in Prague.
Основною такою силою, яка стримувала постачання F-16 були саме Штати, а точніше Білий дім.
That's right, because one way or another we can say that it is not the Americans, but the Europeans who have prepared these aircraft to the point where we can actually pass almost 60 plus or minus.
Можна сказати про те, що не американці, а європейці підготували ці літаки. Підготували настільки, що можна фактично передати майже там 60 плюс-мінус, але робиться це.
But this is being done within the framework of the American requirements that we talked about for the ban, and we see only 16 of them there, and in a possible future, about 20 by the end of the year. So this is obviously a very small number, which does not allow us to say that it can be effective, but it is an important beginning, it is taking place, and we need to develop it.
Це може бути ефективним. Але важливий початок, він має місце.
And we need to work respectively, I would say, to fight, unfortunately, with our ally to ensure that step by step increase of assistance, growth of the potential of this assistance. Despite all these slogans we hear from politicians, including, first of all, from this country, which is our strategic ally. Mr. Ihor, speaking of airplanes, why are we talking to you so much today? Because it is Aviation Day, and we cannot but mention the success of our pilots and Air Force recently. How Ukrainian aviation strikes GBU-62 JDAM bombs at bridge crossings in the Kursk region. I will ask our editors to show this video. The videos were posted on his Telegram channel by the former commander of the Air Force. In this footage, you can see how the Ukrainian Air Force is installing these bombs on the MiG-29, and the famous Ukrainian pilot Vadim Voroshilov is programming the ammunition. And then it strikes the occupiers' crossings from the sky. The work of our pilots is truly fantastic, and we thank them once again on this day, but we should thank them not only today, not only on Aviation Day, but every day. Mr. Ihor, based on this video, how much of a task is it now to strike with Western-style air bombs on the territory of the aggressor country on the crossings, with the slow logistics of the occupiers? And what is happening in the Kursk region? From the data, you know. How much is this operation developing on our side and how much on the side of the occupiers? Because some foreign media publish information, reports that the Russians are resorting to counterattacks in some way. Thus, the fighting in the Kursk sector has its own stages of development. That is, the offensive stage, which was quite successful, in my opinion, has a logical conclusion, given the ratio of forces that are being formed on both sides. That is, during this time, the enemy managed to recover and assemble an appropriate group to stop the advance of the Ukrainian defense forces. In the well-known areas of the cities of Rilsk, Lelgov, Kurchatov, Kursk, and recently in this regard, that is, and they need 30,000 or more for this, they have already engaged some units from the fronts of other countries, experienced, better equipped with armed equipment and ammunition. This has its consequences. And separately, the fighting is going on below the same river. If you look at the map, there are still soldiers there. I think it's not the 3,000 that are being talked about somewhere in the last 2 weeks, because there were bridges for some time, which you showed how successfully destroyed from a military point of view. This is fundamental. And the destruction of pontoon crossings that the Russians are trying to build, and the advance of Glushkov in the northeastern direction, where our forces, parts of the Ukrainian defense forces, are closing this area, and therefore, of course, from a military point of view, this area must be taken under full control. Completely under control, and thus to move to the system of defense of this buffer zone. And this is as if the third goal of the operation, the first one is to prevent an offensive operation on this region. The second one is to achieve the goal of transferring from other parts of the fronts to this area, that is, to weaken the potential, is not being achieved. The Pokrovske and Toretske directions are clear from the reports that they are not overrunning these villages, but other areas are, and these are Kharkiv, Kupiansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the third is the formation of tasks and the fulfillment of tasks. the formation of a buffer zone, so in my opinion it should be completed and the forces should move to defense. To reduce the potential of this area's influence on the Kharkiv, Sumy, and other directions, and in principle, the role and importance of the aviation component is very important everywhere, including in this direction. We can see from the footage you presented how this is done directly, how it affects the enemy's logistics, and our aviation is actively involved in this.
І в тому числі і на цьому напряму тут ми бачимо просто по тим зйомкам, які ви представляли, як це робиться безпосередньо по впливу на логістику противника і тому активно приймає участь.
Our aircraft, including both old Soviet and new F-16s, are few in number, but they are still in use, and the ground units of the defense forces need their work.
Нечисельні, але це ж має місце дуже потрібно силам сухопутним підрозділам Сил оборони робота.
Mr. Ihor, about today's attack by the aggressor Russia, last night the enemy attacked Ukraine again with missiles and Shaheds, as reported. According to the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Russians struck with an Iskander-M ballistic missile from Voronezh region and 52 Shahed attack UAVs from Kursk region. At the same time, the Air Force pointed to an unusual detail of the attack. More than 24 enemy drones fell on their own. I'll quote what was said in the report, that 25 locally lost drones fell on their own, if we're talking about drones. In your opinion, how do you interpret the fact that 25 drones were lost in the area, fell on their own? Could it be the work of electronic warfare? Or could there be some kind of UAV malfunction, and that's why they fell on their own? First of all, it should be noted, and this is understandable, that the enemy is looking for ways to increase the effectiveness of its airstrikes, and the use of different types of airstrike assets. And listed in this airstrike to date how it happened, it should be said that they use aircraft Shaheds, not only as strike aircraft, but also as aircraft that are used in
літальні апарати «Шахеди» не тільки ударного типу, а і в якості літальних апаратів,
that perform tasks to be detected and thus show where the air defense of our air defense systems is located and operates. Such a large number is needed to overwhelm the capabilities of air defense systems to detect. So this is preliminary intelligence.
Потрібно для того, щоб перегружати можливості засобів протиповітряної оборони, щоб виявляти, тобто таким чином розвідка попередня, де вони знаходяться.
Where our air defense assets are located, in order to find and strike them, or to build subsequent waves in such a way as to bypass our cells, i.e., these are actions by the enemy against air attack assets.
Будувати таким чином, щоб обходити наші осередки. Тобто це дії з боку ворога по засобам повітряного нападу. З іншого боку є складова...
Nashik's air defense forces, which operates electronic warfare units, which you mentioned, against air targets, and the impact is made, that is on enemy aircraft, due to which they do not fulfill the task. That is, it's not necessary to physically destroy aircraft. The goal is achieved if the Ukrainian defense forces, if the means.
Це не обов'язково фізично знищувати літальні апарати. Мета досягається, якщо силами оборони України, якщо засоби.
If the weapons fall down, they fail to perform their tasks. And from here, we see that some of them fall because their functions were so ineffective, and others because of the impact of our units, electronic warfare radars, on enemy air targets. And therefore, a fairly significant proportion of them do not even reach the objects to which they were directed and fall somewhere in the fields.
До об'єктів, по яким їх спрямовували, і падають десь там в полях.
Mr. Ihor, of course, we need more air defense systems to shoot down enemy targets. Sabrina Singh said the U.S. has accelerated the supply of weapons to Ukraine, including Patriot air defense systems. We hope for this and expect additional systems. I'd like to refer to your opinion here. Because you said on the air of the telethon that in the matter of closing the skies over Ukraine, we should take into account the experience of Israel, which is fighting non-stop. You mentioned that we also need other tools, and the issue cannot be solved by Patriots alone. We need to be guided by the experience of countries with a similar situation. For example, Israel, which is at war. Could you give us your opinion on how much we can learn from the experience of another country, how much it is possible right now, and your opinion on air defense systems? Why are our allies slowing down this issue? Is it still a logistical problem, or is it a political issue? Unfortunately, first of all, political ones. Why? Because we are talking about the high degree of readiness of our military personnel. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are using weapons that could be provided by Israel in this case, and they have about 8 Patriot batteries there. We are saying that this year, the president has repeatedly insisted on this, and the military and political leadership has been working on this to supply these 7 Patriot batteries, or SAMP-T, or their analogs. Here, Israel alone is removing these weapons to 8 Patriot batteries, for which we have specialists can prepare further, and which we are already working on, and it's a matter of time and quite an accelerated learning curve to master the new capabilities. We lack the tools. Moreover, Israel is a country that is improving the Patriot. They have already made better missiles, cheaper, and with better characteristics for these systems, and they have their own systems, including the famous Iron Dome.
І з кращими характеристиками до цих комплексів, ну і мають свої комплекси, в тому числі відомий залізний купол.
2 of them have been in America for several years now. They have passed their exams and everything else, but the Americans have not adopted them because their system of governance is different and so on, and they could help us. But the question is about the political decision of Israel, their leadership. We know about Netanyahu's long-standing relationship with Putin. Netanyahu took part in various celebrations there in the Russian Federation and so on. These relations are changing, especially after the fighting started last year and the Israelis themselves found out who from which states was involved, how they were involved, not only in working directly with these terrorists, but also in training them, providing them with weapons, equipment, and so on. And this situation is changing, but we see it very slowly, because the Israelis are already fighting themselves. The active phase is underway. They understand more about how we have to perform the tasks. But this does not mean that the political approach and air defense weapons are changing quickly, and the capabilities of this country are different. We need to take a positive example in the work of military science, in the work of the defense industry, and we have the potential they can help us immediately, and there's a common production perspective. But time is of the essence for us, because it is a strategic factor in waging war. But we need results that would take place right now, and first of all, in the field of air and missile defense, where the Israelis, for example, have powerful capabilities. Mr. Romanenko, thank you very much for joining the live broadcast. Thank you for your professional opinions. And let me remind you that Ihor Romanenko A military expert and founder of the Close the Skies of Ukraine Foundation was on the line with us.